Westworld Season 2 is, well, it's kind of a mess. I can't say that I wasn't concerned about this going in, because unlike most people, I wasn't absolutely entranced by the first season. I thought it was pretty good, a bit slow in places, but overall intriguing enough to come back to week after week. And also, Anthony Hopkins was there, so that's a plus. Overall, the show had a great concept, the ideas they were playing with were fascinating, and given how the first season ended, it was clear that we were going to see a whole new side to this world in season 2. And in that regard, I was correct, but little asterisk. Season 2 of Westworld is in many ways like season 2 of Mr. Robot, except less good. What I mean by that comparison is that this season went for escalation more than anything else, taking the style to new heights and expanding on the fringe details of the show's world. But like many later TV seasons and sequels to movies, when audiences really respond to one element of a story, the creators want to push that element and make it shine. Only, it's not clear how much of a certain thing is too much until it's too late. The most prominent example of this with Westworld is the idea of timelines. Season 1 played around with this a lot, but what made it work more effectively there was that the reveal of the different timelines was a twist. There were clues here and there, but you weren't really supposed to know that certain scenes or events were taking place decades earlier until the rest of the story caught up with it. The revelation of the Man in Black's true identity, the revelation that Bernard was actually a host version of one of the park's creators. These moments hit hard because the show wasn't making it painfully obvious that a big twist was coming. And in season 2, there was a lot less of that subtlety. From the very beginning of the first episode, the show was presenting a fractured narrative, jumping back to events and scenes that were taking place 3 weeks earlier, and the more this happened, the more obvious it became that some big twist was coming. And when you add that inherently split narrative to all of the other flashbacks and hallucinations and alternate planes of thought and flash forwards, some of which take place inside the flashbacks, it all gets a little too crowded. And there's nothing wrong with expecting a twist as a story goes along, and after season 1, it would be pretty much inevitable to expect one. But I think season 1 had a lot to do with how this season was structured, because season 1 was fairly infamous for garnering a lot of fan theories. Because this show is packed with so much detail, and those details could lead to many possible outcomes, fans started to pick apart every little aspect of the first season. The twist with William was predicted like 4 episodes in by some guy on Reddit. I think the writers wanted to stay ahead of the audience at all costs, but the biggest cost was that the story jumped around so much in terms of narrative, perspective, time, and everything that it became a convoluted mess. Just to be clear, I don't think that an atypical narrative is inherently messy, even though it's not really my thing, and I also don't think that the biggest problems with this season are solely with structure. I mean, if you tell a dumb story, it's a dumb story. A lot of simply dumb stuff happened this season, and it almost felt like the show was trying to cover it up with its style. But I found the style to be more abrasive than anything, and I was far less engaged with what was happening because I knew it wasn't going to make any sense until the finale, and I knew it would be a disappointment. And I was right, so that counts for nothing. The standout aspect of Westworld really is its unique style and tone. There just isn't another TV show telling a story like this, feeling this experimental. But, on the other hand, when this season slowed down and played it simple and just told a story, it worked so well. The small arc inside Samurai World was fun and very compelling in terms of seeing the host struggles on a completely different battlefield, and the episode Kiksuya is pretty much everything I want out of this show. A straightforward, unique, emotional story that could only take place in this show's world, and which answered one of the biggest ongoing questions about the park itself. That one episode did more to humanize humanized the host than most of the show overall, and Akecheta became the most interesting character out of anyone. I cared more about what he was doing than anyone else, and I'm so glad he got a happy ending. But every time it cut back to Bernard and he started getting a headache and hallucinating or flashing back or forward or whatever, I felt so annoyed because it felt like the writers were just trying to throw me off. The words "is this now" are a psychological trigger for me at this point. My eyes just roll involuntarily. To me, the style didn't deepen the story or make it more intriguing. It was an active barrier to enjoyment, especially in comparison to how good the show was when it was playing it simple. It might be interesting to see a more chronological version of this season, but the revelations only really work because of the fractured structure. Except the fractured structure is really annoying and the revelations are really lame. The big reveals we got in season 2 didn't feel impactful. They felt like they were trying really hard to be impactful, and that's not the same thing. Like in season 1, this season had a few clues towards the big twists, microscopic clues, but when they happened, I just kind of shrugged and went, yeah, okay. That reaction was partly due to some strange actions by some characters that led to the twists, but the twists themselves just felt so weak, and the season just kind of limped to the finish line. It wasn't re-energized at all, which is why I think the finale is easily the worst part of the season. The Westworld Season 2 finale is a very unique little train wreck, and the most prevalent emotion I felt at the end of it was exhaustion. And then I saw the post-credit scene, and annoyance made a comeback. But in terms of exhaustion, I really don't feel like this show has anything that interesting to do anymore. The story has now moved beyond the park, but that environment was a big part of what made the show click, and the roles that central characters now possess are far less compelling than before. The ending of the finale leaves us with Dolores and Bernard as these opposites, as yin and yang, as Professor X and Magneto, battling in the human world. But does that premise really live up to this show's potential? It doesn't even make sense. Beyond the very weak moral reason that Dolores gives, why would she bother resurrecting Bernard if her only goal is to conquer the human world and his only goal is to stop her? Why create a worthy adversary? Why would Bernard so quickly resurrect Dolores for the exact same reason that he killed her, her single-mindedly destructive, borderline genocidal worldview? How did Dolores know to play along and take Hale's place and do it effectively enough that nobody else noticed the sudden shift in Hale's personality? Do any of the hosts in the other parks get to go to the Valley Beyond, or are they not special enough because they didn't dress like cowboys? Why set up this entire journey for William if it has no significant impact on the story as a whole? How can William survive this many gunshot wounds? How can William survive that many gunshot wounds and this much emotional trauma? Is William a host? Was William ever human? Is anyone human? Is anyone a host? As a film student, and as someone who's seen a lot of student films, I can say with absolute certainty, being vague does not make you interesting. And I'm still not clear on how Teddy's body got from that abandoned shack to the flooded valley. There's really no explanation for that. But despite all of this, and while my interest in this show has definitely declined across this season, Westworld still knows how to pull me back in week after week. The first season was building towards a very obvious end point. The hosts were going to rise up and rebel. That was always going to be where that season ended. But because of the jarring new narrative style and lack of a clear end goal in season 2, the show was able to be a lot more experimental and innovative with its story and characters. In concept, that's all good, and I like that I never really knew where everything was headed, but the problem was that the ultimate destination was kinda goofy. Really, this season, and the show as a whole, is built on the idea of intent versus execution. I like pretty much every idea the show is using and basing things on, but the actual delivery of the ideas is so weak. When the show explored other parks and showed similar thematic ideas playing out in these new environments, or brought in the idea of humans trying to be more like like hosts and gain immortality, even getting more personal insight into William. I was really interested to see how those ideas played out. In the end, those detours were far more rich and compelling than the actual story, which all built up to a secret heaven that Ford made for the hosts. And then all the hosts are killed, but then some of them are okay and they're transported to some secret place to live forever. And then some hosts are out in the real world and Bernard's gotta stop Dolores because Professor X and Magneto, and I really don't know who's a human or who's a host, and I really don't care. Again, I just don't think that Westworld has that much more to do. They've hit every major thematic idea within the premise. It's all been done by now, I think. Maybe a change of scenery and a completely different kind of conflict will re-energize this show in season 3. But I'm not really excited. I guess I'm more cautiously optimistic. Like with The Flash season 4, and look how well that worked out. I don't know, maybe season 3 will forge ahead with this story and it'll work really well and I'll keep coming back week after week rediscovering why I like this show so much in the first place. Or maybe it'll crawl even further up its own ass. Both are equally likely. Actually, on second thought, it's far more likely that it will crawl even further up its own ass. Like 70-30? I guess we'll just have to wait and see. And thankfully, we'll probably have another 2 years to do so, which will give us time to let the dust settle and build up some reasonable expectations for this next season. I'm definitely curious to see where things will go, because what I like about this show so much is that you never really know what you're going to get out of an episode until you sit down and watch it. I like the moral grayness this show is developed. No character is truly a hero or a villain. You just root for them as long as they don't do something terrible, and then they eventually do something terrible. The show looks beautiful. The production design is immaculate, and there are clearly so many talented people working on this show and taking advantage of its enormous budget. But I just wish it was in service of something more entertaining. Despite the technical proficiency of this show, I can't remember a single time where I actually reacted to something in a significant way. Except for when Anthony Hopkins reappeared, because I love the guy. But because Westworld's baseline premise is so fascinating, and because I just like big, unique sci-fi adventure stories like this, I'm still on board with this show. Westworld's greatest strength is that I never know what to expect from it. But its greatest weakness is that I can't inherently call that a good thing. Because for all of the symbolism and the lofty monologues about nature and life, this show can be pretty dumb. And just because Westworld thinks it's smart doesn't mean it is. So, those are my thoughts on Season 2 of Westworld. Thank you so much for watching. If you like this video, then feel free to like this video and subscribe if you want to see more like this. Thanks again, and I'll see you next time.